So, if you have not been living under a rock for the past year, you know that 2022 has been an eventful year for a lot of reasons. Today we're going to take a look at some of the big things that have happened in tech this year. We'll start with some more general topics, then talk about new hardware and software, and then finally talk about some of the juicy controversies in tech. Starting off with our general topics is the return of mid-range smartphones, and the general diversity in the smartphone space this year. For far too long, the space has been filled with cheap rectangular plastic slabs and expensive glass and metal slabs. There wasn't much in between. Now though, we're seeing a lot of diversity, especially in the folding phone market, and standard smartphones having to come up with new features to compete. The Galaxy Z4 series has been awesome this year, with the Z Flip being the top-selling foldable phone on the market. Some of the standout phones this year were the aforementioned Z4 series, the iPhone 14 Pro, especially with the fun and very interesting conversations that we've had about the dynamic island. The Pixel 7 and its improved AI image correction, cool looking visor design, and the new cameras. The Oppo Find N, which is in my opinion, the phone with the best folding form factor, and the Surface Duo 2, for trying its best. The themes for smartphones this year seem to be wacky new designs and cameras. Lots of camera improvements, which to me shows that the smartphone market is kind of stagnating. I mean, you don't really see many crazy new designs except for foldable phones nowadays, and the desire to get the next new thing has kind of been going down over the past few years, and this year I feel that especially, which just shows that the hardware of a smartphone has matured almost to its breaking point. We're going to have to see some new crazy things in the next coming years in order for companies to continue selling devices. Companies have been pushing the move to web-based platforms for a while now, but they've pushed a lot harder in my opinion this year. The Microsoft Office suite has been available on the web, and when opening a document in Teams, it now defaults to opening a web viewer in the Teams app. Flux.ai is an awesome electrical engineering platform allowing you to simulate circuits and design PCBs, all with just your browser. This isn't sponsored or anything, I just really find this cool. This year more than ever, I've become very annoyed with not being able to download native versions of apps that I can use offline. With the internet getting more fast and widespread, it makes sense why more platforms are becoming web-based. It's still annoying, but it's very easy to understand from a developer's point of view. A web browser is one platform to develop for, instead of, 5 or 6, being Android, iOS, Windows, macOS, Linux, and more. But it doesn't make me any less miffed. While electronic shortages are still around, they have improved quite a bit. At this point, a Best Buy or a Micro Center with a GPU in stock is available to most people, and if not, Newegg seems to be keeping up with stock pretty well too. Other categories like automotive electronics have still been a shortage, but again, it's not nearly as bad as it was. It's still near impossible to buy a Raspberry Pi at MSRP though, so if anyone has some tips for that, leave them in the comments. We've moved on to our next session, new stuff. And oh boy, is there a lot to talk about. Personally, my favorite piece of hardware this year has been the Steam Deck. While not officially launching in 22, this year is the year that most people have gotten their pre-orders, including me. The power to play your Steam library without having to set up a mouse and keyboard and laptop wherever you go is awesome. Thankfully, the Steam Deck isn't the only product in this space though. The GPD Win 4 was announced along with some serious competition from Ayaneo. And then there's Logitech, who completely missed the entire point of what this genre of handheld is. While the Steam Deck is awesome, it's really good to have competition in this space, as that's what fuels innovation. The M2 MacBook Air came out this year. I was not overwhelmed nor underwhelmed, just whelmed. Yeah, the design is awesome, it looks really cool, but the M2 wasn't nearly as much of a step up as people thought it would be. That coupled with the somewhat lower build quality, like the trackpad being a little iffy, and the half-speed SSDs on the base model, makes this a computer that I wouldn't really recommend to many people. I don't think many would disagree that the RTX 4000 series has been making some big waves in the tech space. Not only is Nvidia sticking to their claims that innovation costs a ton more than it used to, but AMD is starting to prove them wrong with their Radeon 7000 series. This is really the first time that we've ever seen a chiplet design in a GPU. Meaning that instead of one complex, expensive silicon die, we have multiple smaller ones spread out under the heat spreader. And while Intel Arc platform hasn't been a super smooth launch, Intel has worked very hard to improve DirectX 9 support, which greatly improves Intel Arc's performance in older applications and games. Honestly, I feel like Intel's doing pretty well with this, and if they can keep it up for another generation or two, I can see them becoming a serious competitor. Ryzen 7000 and Intel's Raptor Lake 13th gen CPUs have been awesome too. This is a year of competition, and this is really refreshing to me, as the past couple of years have really come down to, well, do you want cheap or do you want good? This competition in these spaces is awesome because it drives performance up and costs for consumers down. There have been some really interesting software-related things too. Scientists simulated a wormhole in a quantum computer, and artificial intelligence is rivaling human artists. Things like DALL-E 2, ChatGPT, and GitHub Copilot have been super interesting and a bit concerning. I can now write large amounts of code while only pressing Shift-Tab with GitHub Copilot. But I feel like the biggest news in software this year has been OpenAI with their ChatGPT and DALL-E 2 platforms. These have taken over large portions of the internet recently. DALL-E 2 and Stable Diffusion in general have been creating art based on other people's work, and it's very impressive. Most people's biggest concern is how programs like these don't really disclose what they were trained on and use people's original art as reference without attributing the creators. On a lot of AI-generated art, you can actually see the remnants of signatures from the artists it's been trained on in common places where, artists would put their signatures. ChatGPT has been writing essays for people with very little corrections from students. I asked it to write a calculator program in Java, and it did. I asked it to write a poem about refrigerators, and it did, with some grammatical errors, but it overall was fine. And as a student, it's equal parts impressive and terrifying as of right now. There's not a great way to find if something was written by a human or a robot. These technologies are still in their infancies, so there's a lot of room to improve on their flaws, but it's very clear that some changes need to be made to protect students and creators alike. On a lighter note, one thing I do enjoy looking at every year are OS adoption rates and market shares. While these aren't year-specific technically, I still find it very interesting. According to StatCounter.com, Windows still dominates the space by 75%, macOS in second with 15%, Linux and Chrome OS with about 2.5% each. The other 5% isn't known, but I'd wager that most of the unknown market share is occupied by GNU/Linux-based systems. Of course, what would be a year without some drama and controversies? Some people have experienced 10 or more YouTube ads before a video due to Google testing ways to make their site more profitable. This has caused some serious uproar, but not nearly as much uproar as the Doge Lord himself, Elon. This man seems to be competing in a new speedrun category, ruining everything. For those still under a rock for the past 2 years, he bought Twitter and proceeded to lay off half their staff, while dropping his reputation like a bowling ball in the Mariana Trench, managing to cut Tesla's stock price in half, then half again. He said some pretty nasty stuff over there, so I'm going to stay away from Twitter as long as I have to, and maybe longer than that. This has been a wild year as far as technology goes, and I'm honestly really grateful to be a part of it. Thanks for supporting. Now, you won't catch me doing this often, but apparently 90% of you who watch these videos aren't subscribed, so if you want to see more videos from me, let me know by subscribing and maybe commenting what other topics you'd want me to talk about. Thank you ever so much for watching. Have a great New Year's and have a great rest of your day.